Welcome to SweetSpotDFS. I have a video for you guys that is going to explain the bucket system and how to use it. If you haven't seen any of my DFS strategy videos, you may not know what the heck I'm talking about. If that's the case, here's a quick explanation. I group golfers into buckets to help narrow player pools and determine good plays versus bad plays. The buckets are ranked, and the lower the score, the better the play. That's the too long didn't read version. In the rest of the video, I'm going to further explain what it is, actually give you a deeper explanation. I'm going to tell you how to use it, or at least ways that I've utilized it myself. I'm going to help you, or I'm going to let you know how I calculate those buckets and give you the results over, I'm going to give you like 6 tournaments and probably 2 or 3 years of each, basically, to show you the results and how it's worked in the past. So I have timestamps in the description. Chapter mode is enabled. That way you can click on the little red progress bar, either on mobile or on desktop, to see where you are and where you want to be. So you can utilize that to the full advantage. Okay, so for those that have seen my videos and are still lost, here's a more detailed explanation. Let me get something on the screen for you guys. That way it might be a little helpful. So the bucket system is a ranking system based off of a golfer's performance from last year's tournament as well as last week's tournament. These ranks are determined only by analyzing the top 10 golfers of each year. And this dates back to 2013 of each event. This is primarily because I am only looking to create the optimal lineup. Like, that's the main purpose of the bucket system and the main purpose why I create lineups. I want the best possible lineup I can create, and that is the optimal lineup. So that is the purpose of the bucket system. It's to find the optimal lineup. So a little bit further here, each week I assign golfers 2 numbers between 1 and 6, which are the 2 buckets, the last year bucket and the last week bucket. If you hear me identify a player as a 1-1 or a last year 1 or a last week 1, that's me referencing the bucket system. The first number in that combination will always be the last year bucket, and the second number will always be the last week bucket. Because I commonly refer to players as 1-1s, 2-1s, 3-1s, 3-2s, 5-4s, that kind of thing. That's me referencing the bucket system. And again, the lower the number, the better the play. So if you do hear me say, I don't like Colin Morikawa this week because he is a 5-2, you would understand, obviously, if the numbers are between 1 and 6, 5 is closer to 6. It's probably why I don't like him, you know. And it is a unique process, like I've said before, and it helps narrow down player pools. So if I'm looking for a 10K golfer and one of them ends up being a 5-2, I'm probably going to fade that guy. And more often than not, it's going to be absolutely perfect. So that is why I use a bucket system. That is more of a fuller explanation. Let's go ahead. Let me show you what it looks like on the spreadsheet, just so you guys, you know, if you haven't seen my DFS strategy videos, you're not completely lost. So every week I go through the bucket system in my DFS strategy videos, and usually we first go to the notes page where it's housed. So it would look something like this. You would see a table like this. We're not really going to talk about it, or we won't talk about it right now. I just want you to see what it looks like on the spreadsheet. The bucket system numbers are to the left of the player's name. So as we go through these spreadsheets and we look at these golfers, typically I always have, you know, I'll probably will freeze a pane over here. I better do something quickly though. These are my lineups that I played for the US Open. But if I hide this and then I freeze the pane here, this way we can determine, you know, looking at the bucket score and the rest of the stats, what, you know, in combination with the bucket system, you know, do we like Bryson because of his POA? You know, he's a 4-1. His post stats are 39.76. Do we like that? Or we can look at off the tee, that kind of stuff. So we can combine stats with the bucket system. But also, you know, if you look at the top 10 here, you're going to see more last year ones than you're going to see any of the other buckets. And obviously the last week bucket is pretty high. Now, the US Open, like as much as I want to sell you on this, I'm also going to give you a realistic version of this. So if I were to go and sort the other way, you can see on this first page, which is just, this is 19 golfers. The whole field was 145. So you can start to see it starts ones, you know, starts to be ones right underneath, or last week ones, I'm sorry, this column here. After these 19 golfers, it's nothing but last week ones. So no matter what, they're going to be last, you know, most of the leaderboard is going to be last week ones. However, I do have to show you that no other last week bucket finished inside the top 10. Therefore, these guys could be eliminated. So if you were on Phil Mickelson, you know, wouldn't be a great play. Like a lot of people were on Ches Reavie, not a lot of people, but at 6,900, 10% of golfers, DFS golfers, were on Ches Reavie. Now, if you saw Ches Reavie was a last week too, and that was the reason why you didn't want to play him, you know, that's on you. For me, I think I played him in a few lineups, but I didn't go all in on him or anything like that. And it's not really, I can't tell you for certain it's because of the bucket. I would have to go back to the strategy video and see if that was the case. But sorting it out, I just want to give you the realistic aspect of it. You know, sometimes these buckets are really big because, again, I'm grouping them based off their last year performance and last week performance. And I'll get to that right after this. After I finish with this little segment here. But, you know, if we looked at the last year buckets, you know, this is one bucket. These golfers are in their own bucket. It's a last year one bucket. Now, I just want to show you like the notable things about putting golfers in buckets. So you get to choose X amount of golfers from this bucket. I mean, that's kind of how I portray it every single week. You want to choose somewhere between 1 and 3 last year ones. Now, there were 4 last year ones that finished inside the top 10, but even if I were to say 1 to 3, it's still going to be correct. Of course, there can be more and there can be less, but on average, 1 to 3, and I'm not even using like a specific number. I could go to the notes page and look at the ones. So a minimum of, oh, not here. Sorry. We're looking here. Yeah. So it was between 1 and 6. You want to play 1 to 6 last year ones. And I'll get to that later. I'm not going to, you know, really dig into it. But if I were to tell you want to play 1 to 6 last year ones and you look at everybody here, you know, there are some players you can play and some players you can't play. I mean, you couldn't play Rahm, Simpson, McIlroy, Xander all together in one lineup. You know, that would be silly. So really, you'd have to choose who's your favorite high price last year one. And then if you think about it, you're like, okay, well, I can't play Rahm, McIlroy, and Schauffele together. I maybe could play Schauffele, McIlroy, and Simpson together, but does that leave me any, you know, salary? Not really. So, gosh, do I really think I need to play more than one last year one? Well, I don't know. You know, we have Louis, who's at a good price, 7,600. Maybe Fitzpatrick, you know, he plays hard golf courses really well. Maybe Gary Woodland. You know, you can obviously see a lot of the ownership of people were on those golfers. Well, I'm here to tell you, you know, it just depends on what your convictions are. And maybe if you compare this with another thing, but you could have easily gotten on, you know, Louis Oosthuizen, and you could have possibly gotten on Victor Hovland to pair with, you know, Xander Schauffele. Because those, I mean, having these two golfers, you needed them in the optimal lineup, but Hovland would give you a little bit of a price, you know, relief. But either way, as we look at the rest of the buckets, you really have to determine by bucket. I mean, the one thing I've learned doing this over the last the last year and a half. It's almost been 2 years. It really largely depends on the talent within each pool. Sure, these rankings show you a good play versus a bad play, but it all really comes down to the bucket. I mean, not the bucket, the talent inside the bucket. So like Matthew Wolff, he was a last year 3, as was Will Zalatoris. Obviously last year 3s aren't as good as last year 1s, but Matthew Wolff finished 2nd. That's going to happen when we look at something like the buckets, or looking at all the buckets. You can see the last year 3 bucket was pretty large in the US Open. But here's a really interesting one to look at here. Last year 4s. Last year 4s had a lot of firepower. I mean, look at all of the golfers within this bucket. The price tags were pretty large. And I guess what I can do just to make this easier for you guys to see, let's go here. Let's look at price from top to bottom. You can see most of the golfers are over $8,000. And the ownership was pretty high all across the board. I mean, Brendan Wu, he was an insignificant last year 4 compared to the rest of the guys. But as we, sort it by the result, only 2 golfers finished inside the top 10. The winner obviously finished inside the top 10. But if you were to look at this salary board, look at all the golfers up there, do you really think, here, I can go back to the notes page and tell you need to play somewhere between 1 to 2 last year 4s. That is my min-max, which I'll talk about later. My min-max for last year 4s. Again, this is the last year 4 bucket. Golfers who finished the last year tournament somewhere between 20 and 40th place. Go back to this, all these golfers had, the finishing position you can see right over my head. They all finished in that last year bucket. So these are all last year bucket 4s. I said 1 to 2. In order to hit your optimal lineup, you needed 1. You really just needed the 1. Dustin Johnson was too expensive. 6th place finish isn't terrible, but you need 1 to 2. Again, how many of you guys probably started something like Morikawa, Bryson, DJ Bryson, maybe Bryson and Cantlay, or Bryson and Hideki? Obviously if you had Bryson, you were probably winning some money. But if you didn't have Bryson and you went with like 4 of these guys, like Hatton, Reed, Woods, if you went with that, you lost. You really didn't utilize I shouldn't say that. You just did poorly, right? But again, this is where the bucket system comes in handy. It tells you how much you should play of golfers within a bucket. Now, of course, these buckets can get broken. It again is largely dependent on the talent within each bucket. Now, I'm just telling you from experience, doing this for the year and a half I've done it. I think I started doing it before the American Express. Well, I did it before the playoffs 2 years ago. I don't remember exactly when, but I think it was somewhere around the FedEx St. Jude. Maybe it was a little bit earlier. From that moment on, as I've been doing this, I mean, I kind of was tracking it a little bit before that, but I didn't really dive into it until then. It rarely has a mistake. The limitations of what you should play stands this, I wouldn't say the test of time, but it's very close. So if I were to go ahead, undo this, and then we can look at the rest, like the next notable thing is last year 5s. If we went back to the notes page, looked at last year 5s, somewhere between 0 and 3, it's still a low bucket, but it's not dead. It's not saying you shouldn't play this, but there's the possibility you could get 0. Therefore, you didn't want to really invest heavily on the last year 5s. Doesn't mean don't play it. But if we come down to last year 6s, there's maybe two notable golfers, but there's really one notable golfer that, garnered 12% ownership, and that was Tommy Fleetwood. I was completely off of Tommy Fleetwood, mostly because when we look at the last year's 6 bucket, only one golfer over the last 6 years in that last year's 6 bucket finished inside the top 10. Only one. That's it. Was it going to be Tommy Fleetwood? I mean, it could have been, right? It could have been. But when I look at this, the one over the last couple of years, like, it just shows you can't have complete confidence in Tommy Fleetwood. You know, if you had a conviction play, like you knew he was going to play well, maybe the bucket system tells you, don't put all your eggs in that basket. So that is kind of like the reason why I like the bucket system so much, and kind of giving you a little oversight of what it helps to do. Like I said, it narrows player pools, and using the US Open 2020 kind of helps. Now, if we look at the 2019 US Open, I thought I for sure had a filter on this. You can see how many last year 1s, last year 2s finished inside the top 10. 2018, I think, is a little different. Nope. 2018 is nearly the same. So you can see for the US Open, it works out pretty nicely. Excuse me. I have a hair or something tickling my nose. Okay. So it kind of goes to prove or shows that it works. Okay. So the reason I started doing this was I'm a competitive golfer myself, and I wanted to encompass the psychology part of golf. When trying to create lineups, we can all speculate as much as possible based off of really anything, honestly. Like Patrick Reed getting called a cheater at an event. Does that play a huge factor in Patrick Reed's next event? Or DJ, falling down the stairs, or there was some kind of speculation that, he might be doing blow or something like that. Those are all fun and games. Like, that's all speculation. And they actually, like, as a competitive golfer or just as an athlete in general, those do have consequences. Like, there's no doubt about it, but there's no way to quantify that. There's no way to capture that and throw it into, into some kind of model or whatever, some kind of result, some kind of process. It's really difficult, and some of it's just noise. When you get on the golf course, that might be someone's happy place, But for me as a competitive golfer, the one thing I think about when I'm at a golf course or before the start of a tournament, like I said, as a competitive golfer, before the start of an event, a large amount of my confidence comes from my last round that I played. And I'm guessing that happens for most of you guys too. I mean, the PGA Tour pros are no different than us, other than they know how to hit a ball straight and they know how to put the ball in the hole less times than we do. And I shouldn't say they know how to hit the ball straight, but they know how to control their golf ball. They know their game really well. And a lot of it is just their short game. They're so much better at their short game than we are. It's, there's no way we would get close. Either way, when it comes to psychology, they're no different than us. They are going to think about their last round of golf. A lot of them, it's going to be their last competitive round of golf, whether that was last week or 3 weeks ago. In that case, where it's I really don't look at 3 weeks ago. I only look at last week. If they took the week off, that tells me something. They had the opportunity to either rest, relax, or work on their game. So that in itself is a bucket. Golfers who did not play. Of course, there are buckets that go with other finishing positions, and I'll get to that, in a little bit here. But really largely depends on how well did they play at their last event? That to me is going to signify a motivational factor. And that's what I'm trying to incorporate into my DFS strategy, is trying to figure out what does it mean to miss the cut the week before. Some of these golfers, it's not good. You know, they're not good in general. Therefore, I mean, comparative to, it's all relative. You know, they're all on the PGA Tour because they're good, but compared to the rest of their, gosh, what would you call them? Colleagues, I guess. They aren't, you know, up to they're not up to par. Let's put it that way. The other part of that is, what did I do at this event last year? You know, if I can hone in on some good feelings, and you hear PGA Tour pros talk about this, well, you know, last year I was so close, you know, I did this, and then I just made a mistake on that hole. That stuff sticks with them. And whether it's positive or negative, I mean, that's always yet to be determined, but at least we can throw that into a bucket. If a golfer finished second place last year and he lost, meaning he was in first place but moved to second, that's different than someone birdieing the last to leapfrog over somebody else that was in second. You know, that's a good feeling second place, as the other one is a bad feeling second place. Now, I'm not really registering that data. I'm not really thinking about that unless I have it in my notes. But that second place gets thrown into a bucket. It's its own bucket. So that is something also that I consider. Because, again, me, myself, I'm a competitive golfer. Therefore, what I did at an event the year before is going to be largely in my mind, as well as what happened last week. It's the most recent thoughts we have, the most recent form of course history and recent form. That's how I look at the bucket system. It's really trying to capture motivation, trying to capture really previous results, recent results, how that affects a golfer going forward. So that is primarily the reason why I am capturing this data. So let me show you how it's calculated. Every single year, again, I look at the top 10 of golfers. I also do look at the top 5 every single year. But for the sake of, you know, making this longer than it needs to be, let's look at the top 10. The top 10, I will go every single year, 2019, 2018, 2017, 2016, so on and so forth. And I will look at golfers within that top 10 and what the result was the year before. So if we go to 2019 and look at the golfers who finished first to 20th, let's just go to 2019. So I'm going to go to the recent form tab that I have of 2019. What the notes page tells me is there should be 5 golfers who had a first to 20 finish the year before. So go to 2019. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all within the top 10. So I throw them into this cell right here. Why this cell? Well, I have 6 ranges that I throw golfers into. It just depends on their finishing position. Why 6? Well, 6 is actually a very common number in DFS golf. You have 6 positions to fill when it comes to lineup creation. I know there are some sites that have different, but for the main ones like DraftKings and FanDuel, it's 6. 6 is also a very even number when it comes to thinking about the cut, golfers who make the cut. When I first started doing this, the cut was top 70 in ties. And if the cut ever had more than 78 golfers inside the cut. So let me explain that really quickly. A cut happens every Friday at an event. That's after their second round. Sometimes there are ties that exceed 70th place. If that goes over 78th place, the tour then, in the past, used to have a secondary cut that would happen on Saturdays. So after the third round. And that would be top 60 in ties. So, very rarely, but sometimes, the cut would actually have 80-some golfers in it. And then they would obviously have the secondary cut. But sometimes they didn't. Most of the time they didn't. They had somewhere between 70 and 77, 78. Why I go by sixes is because if you do every 20th place, you can get to 80, have a missed cut / withdraw bucket, and a did not play bucket to make your 6 buckets. So basically, it's just even math. And I never really cared if there. I think there was one event where there were 86 or 87 people that made the cut, and that means there was up to 87 places. I just never cared about that. Anyone that made the cut and did not finish, I just gave them a 75. That's how I look at my stats. It's not that big of a deal if they got 78th or 79th. They just got 75. And they fell into that 60 to 80 bucket, that range. So 6 is just an easy number to choose from. And it works out when creating the buckets. I did go by 15s at one point in time. So all of my ranges go by 20s. And then based off of the golfer's finishing position, I throw them into that range. And in all reality, these ranges you could call buckets themselves. But I don't want to really overcomplicate this or confuse you anymore. But 1 to 20 is a range that I'll throw golfers into to determine a bucket. Like I said, it goes by 20. So 1 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80. 80 plus is just missed cuts, withdraws, and DQs. That is all that this bucket consists of. And then, of course, the did not play bucket. And then once I've captured all the data of every top 10 golfers. So how about we do this? I'll do this really quickly with you for the US Open. So for 2020, if I went to the 2020 page, I think I can go here actually. We can look at the top 10 golfers and determine how many there are. So how many had a 1 to 20 finish? There's 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4. So what I would do, go ahead and put a 4 in there, and do the same thing for 20 to 40. So we have 1, 2, and a lot of this is color coded to make it easy. So I have 2. 40 to 60. I have 1. Let's go 60 to 80. There's 0. Why don't we just go to the next one? Missed cut. Oh, I had 2. Okay, so we'll update that. 2. This was 0, and this was 2. And then the did not plays. 1, 2. So this should equal up to be the exact same amount of golfers who finished inside the top 10. So that's 12. If we go and look, 13th is the next place. So that means there were 12. Now I do this every single week. I will add to the next column, which means it updates the bucket system every single year. Every single year there's a tournament. Now, if there hasn't been any changes, that's awesome. I don't have to change any of the buckets. But sometimes I will. And that's just part of the system, is updating it to find the next best bucket. And sometimes they're really close. And that's fine. To me, it's perfectly natural. Sometimes we don't understand, not so much understand, but we don't think about how schedule changes happen. What tournament comes before the US Open typically? Are people playing in that tournament? A lot of people, obviously, one of the important buckets is finishing inside the top 20. I mean, look at how many times somebody finishes inside the top 10 who had a top 20 finish the year before. It's pretty consistent. Likewise, I'm not going to do the last week bucket again just to save time, but if we went here and look at everybody that finished inside the top 10, not a single person played the week before that finished inside the top 10. So obviously Lucas Glover finished 65th at the Safeway Open, but the rest of the guys in the top 10 did not play. And probably perfect reason why, right? They either want to get their practice in at the US Open, maybe they just wanted to take a week off because everybody else played at the Tour Championship. Not everybody else, but most of the guys played at the Tour Championship. So that was worth, thinking about and considering. So I guess I don't really have to talk much more about, the buckets. I showed you how the buckets are created. I hope you guys understand that. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. It'll help the whole entire community that comes here and watches this. Because if you do have, questions, if it doesn't make sense, if I can answer that question in the comments and somebody else comes and watches and they have the exact same concern or, just the same question, they can go to the comment section, read what you wrote and what I answered, and it might make it clear to them. So I highly, well, I shouldn't say advise or recommend, but I would ask you guys, if you do have questions, please leave them in the comments. You can email me as well, and you can tweet at me as well. Those two avenues work just the same. But yeah, I just wanted to say that little piece here. Okay. So that's how it's calculated. I want to show you my favorite ways of using this. And I'll stick here with the US Open. So my favorite ways to use this, first and foremost, is the min-max. You kind of already heard me throughout this video tell you, you want to play it X amount of times, a minimum of this and a maximum of that. That's the min-max version. So, I think it's self-explanatory. It's really looking within this range, seeing the lowest number and seeing the highest number and determining how many guys you want to play based off that. So that is my first way that I kind of look at this. And how I use that is I first go to the top of the salary leaderboard. So if I go to the 2020 DK page and we sort this by salary and look at the top guys, my first inclination when I look at this is, okay, I just want to say this first. If this was a 4 and I needed 3 to 6, as soon as I come to that 2020 DK page, I'm already looking at Rahm, McIlroy, and Xander. And I'm thinking I need to play at least one of them. Because if at least 3 finish inside the top 10 every single year, it's got to be one of those guys. And if I was betting, that's how I would also use this too. Is, okay, how much of a favorite, how likely is a favorite going to win? And if the last year, if one of those buckets matches a lot of the golfers up here, I'm going to play it considerably. So I'm going to move that back to a 1 just so I don't screw it up for future uses. But I'm going to first come here and look at this. The other thing that I'm going to do is actually come up to the top 5 bucket. Now, I didn't talk about this because I didn't want to confuse you guys or overcomplicate things, but this is looking at top 5 finishes as opposed to top 10 finishes. And with that, when I look at top 5 finishes, this also helps me determine which high price guys I want to play. Because if I see one of these guys, if I see a constant, I shouldn't say constant. Let's put it this way. If I don't see a 0 in one of these columns, whether it's this one, not columns, rows, or any of these, like if this had at least 1, I would also be looking at last year 2s pretty heavily. But my last year 1s, I already knew I needed to play a last year 1. So your convictions have to be, for me, they're going to be set. I'm going to play a last year 1 no matter what. And that's how I looked at creating lineups. In fact, if I go and open this up, basically what you're going to see is most of these columns for my lineups are going to have this dark green color. That's the other thing I forgot to mention. They're all color coordinated based off the rank. So last year one is this dark green color. As you can see, I had a dark green in just about every single lineup. This one was actually my dummy lineup that I put in. I just didn't choose to color it, but I did want to include it. But you can see I have a last year one. Unfortunately, I don't have like a little table or some kind of count that shows you how many last year ones I played. But I can tell you I utilize the bucket system every single week. I use it how I see fit, really, or what the stats bear out to me or show me. But yeah, my favorite play was Xander Schauffele. And a lot of it had to do with his form coming into this tournament. The fact that he has had nothing but top 5 finishes, like 4.67 was his tournament history. That's his average at a US Open, 4.67. So that kind of played a little bit into it. When we looked at, Rahm was the hottest golfer going into it. I think that was a last year one. Actually, Xander's recent form was better, but either way, everything considered, I liked Xander better than Rory and Jon Rahm. And again, it comes down to the last year ones. But I saw, even in the top 5s, I wanted somewhere between 1 and 4. 1 and 4. So when I look at the rest of the last year ones, I really didn't know where to go. If I was starting with Xander, my first thought was I need someone 8K or lower. So I first kind of looked down here and tried to skim some of the golfers down here. I ended up getting on a lot of Louis. Primarily because he was a high-ranked golfer, official world golf ranking. And his game was a little bit more dependable than the rest of the guys down here. I did play a lot of Danny Willett, too. Like, I'm not going to lie. I played a lot of him. I played some Ches Reavie just because his form coming into the tournament was really good. But I really didn't play a lot of these guys here. I played, a considerable amount of these guys in different lineups. I didn't play a lot of them together, but I fell a lot on Louis, and Louis got me a third. And again, this bucket finished 2 golfers inside the top 5. And really, you had 2 other golfers lurking outside of the top 5 that could have easily been inside it. But either way, that bucket now goes to 2. It just goes to show this kind of history repeats itself a little bit. That's kind of what the bucket system does. It kind of helps with that. So that's kind of, another layer to this whole thing. And that's one of the ways that I utilize it. Another way I utilize it is using the percentages off to the right. So when I look at something like this, all this reads is 42% of golfers who finish inside the top 5 between the years of 2019 and 2014, or 2014 and 2019, I should have said it that way. 42% of them fell in the last year bucket one. 42%. That's nearly half. So what you could do is, if you were to create 100 lineups, you could either go 42% of your 100 lineups, you put a last year one in there, at least one of them, or you break out how many player positions you have, because that's kind of what I do. So if you created 100 lineups, you have 600 positions available. 600 times 0.42. Let's see here. Let's go calculator. Now this is where it's going to be very complicating. Sorry, computer's being slow. This is compelling. I didn't think my computer was really using this much bandwidth. I just opened up like 15 instances of it. Okay, so here's the calculator on the screen. So again, if I were to use that 600 times 0.42, easy way to do percentages, but I could go 42.11 or 42.11. And what this number is going to give me is 252.66. So the overly complicated version of this is, out of my 600 positions, I can play 252 of those as last year ones. To add another layer and complication to it, I hope some of you guys can follow me with this. If I look at my min max of lineups for last year ones, it shows 100%. A last year one has finished inside the top 5 100% of the time over the last 6 years. So if I were to go ahead and create a lineup, like if we go back here and let's pretend, actually I'm not going to. Let's say we clear all of this. I'm gonna go all the way to here. I can go something like this. You know, so here's 100 lineups. Basically, my sheet, when I create lineups in this one column, will just be dark green. I mean, it's not going to all be Xander, but it could be. You know, if you were really in on Xander, he is your last year one, and that's what your anchor spot is. But basically, 100 of my lineups are going to have Xander. If I bring this back again and minus by 100, since I already have 100 positions filled with Xander Schauffele, it means I have 152 positions open for other last year ones. So I know that is a very complicated way of using the bucket system. I know most of you guys are just like, oh my God, I don't even care. There's no way I'm going to create lineups that way. Yada, yada, yada. And I don't blame you. Like, I have a very... my brain is always going. It's always moving. So something like that for me, I love it. Like, I love thinking about creating lineups that way. But if you come to my DFS strategy videos and I show you what the bucket is for the last year one, and you see a golfer you like a lot, and I'm telling you, or we're going over the spreadsheet, and I'm saying, you know, you want 100% of your lineups to have at least one last year one, and out of your entire pool of players or your entire lineups, you want to have 42% of your lineups, 42% of your entire positions be last year ones. That should be helpful. You know, that could have gotten you on Xander and Louis. Unfortunately, it really can't get you on anyone else. Like, you needed Xander and Louis. But if you think about it, if you create 100 lineups, what's the likelihood of you putting Xander and Louis together? And how many times would you do it? And how many times would you pair them up with the rest of the buckets or the rest of the golfers that finished well in other buckets? So again, if we were to do that, you know, boom, we got you on Xander and Louis. Maybe you like Wolf at 7,700. Now you've got 3 golfers inside the top 20. And if you think about using the bucket system, or not so much top 20, top 5. If you think about using the bucket system and you're like, all right, I don't think I want to play any more last year 3s. Like, I have enough last year 3s. Or maybe I have room for one more. But sometimes it can be 0. Most of the time it's 1. One time it was 4. Maybe I move around with my lineups and think about playing maybe another last year 3. And perhaps that's Will Zalatoris. You know, if you already liked Will Zalatoris, this is giving you reason to play him with Matthew Wolff. And again, if you're thinking about last year ones, maybe you don't play Xander and you play Rory McIlroy. You know, because I don't remember what the price tag was. This 49,500. So that was like or 49,900. That was so good that you really couldn't go from Xander to Rory. You'd be overpriced. You'd have to cut down. Say maybe you don't go with Harris English because you don't trust Harris English, and maybe instead you went with Alex Noren because he was the last year 2. You know, if we were going by the buckets, you want to stay from last year 5s. You could have done this with Rory at 49,500. You could have done this with Webb Simpson at 9,700. You know, maybe you don't go with Xander at all, and you go with the low price guys with last year ones, and you go Victor. Actually, maybe you go Victor Hovland, Louis Oosthuizen. Maybe you do go Harris English, and you have $8,900 left. I don't see how you really get on anyone else. I don't think it's going to work out, but maybe you're on Will Zalatoris. And then now you have like, you can do anything. You know, there's 3 last year ones for you right there. Or maybe you don't go that route and you went Justin Thomas, because obviously thinking of this would be overpriced, but either way, you kind of get the idea. I mean, it could get you on someone like Adam Long, you know, if you thought you needed to play another last year 3. Now, 3 last year 3s, that'd be no bueno. But either way, the possibilities of creating lineups are endless when you think about it. And I'm telling you, you're going to be limiting your plays based off of buckets. And it could be helpful for you based on how many lineups you do create. I think the more lineups you create, the more this helps you out. I think the less lineups, it's really difficult, you know, because you're really thinking, okay, I need 3 last year 1s, I need 2 last year 2s, but now I can only play 1 more from a different, but I don't really like that. Maybe I go this way. It might be a little bit more confusing with the least amount of lineups you can, or lesser amount of lineups you can create. For me, when I create more, it helps me just narrow down on certain plays. And this could be another layer when it comes to your player pool creation. You know, when you're trying to eliminate players out of your pool. Because again, if you think to yourself, however you do this, you know, 10K and above, I just want 1. I have to determine which one it is. Maybe you cross Morikawa and DJ out of your lineup just because they're 4s, last year 4s. And now it's between Xander, Rahm, JT, and Rory. And you're like, what the heck? I'm just going to go with the low guy, you know, the low price guy, because why not? You know, he's going to offer me more value, and I'm going to be able to play different other players. And then you go, okay, I need someone between the 9 and 8K range. Who's that going to be? You know, you're looking at all of these golfers right here. Maybe it gets you on someone like Tony Finau, and you totally skip Bryson, you know, for whatever reason. Either way, you're already starting pretty decent. You have a 5th place and an 8th place on your board. You know, it's nice when you can go by bucket, determine, you know, also by price what your favorite play is, and then drop down to the next guy. A lot of the times I pick my last year 1 from the top guy, and then my next guy will be a last year 2, or maybe a last year 3. It really goes down to my favorite play. And then I'm keeping track. Okay, so I did X amount of this bucket. I can no longer grab players from that bucket. And like I said, more often than not, it helps. So those are 2 ways of using it. Here's the third one. And this is where it's going to get a little bit more complicating, and probably one way you might not even think about it. It's pairing the 2 buckets together and creating basically their own bucket. So I call them bucket combinations. And there are 36 bucket combinations. If you think about how it works out, you've got, you know, last year 1 to last week 6, you know, or 1 1s to 1 6s, and that goes all the way across. So there's 36 of them. It's not terrible. It's a lot still, but then you can also keep track of how often a bucket combination has finished inside a top 5 and a top 10. And that's what I do every single week. So if you watch all my DFS strategy videos, we start right here at the bucket system part, usually, and talk about all of the different combinations. I'm not going to go further than that. I just want you to know I do keep track of that. And I mean, there are trends, you know, like a US Open has seen a 1-1 almost every single year, not quite, almost every single year. And again, we can go, what is a 1-1? Well, a last year one is a golfer who finished top 20 the year before and a golfer who did not play the week before. So in 2020, I guarantee you we saw a couple 1-1s at the top. Of course, Louis and Xander. So again, we see a 1-1. It didn't happen for whatever reason in 2017, but that will happen sometimes. I mean, we only saw one last year one and ended up being the winner. Who was that guy in 2017? Brooks? Yeah, Brooks. Yeah, it's really interesting not seeing anyone else finish inside the top 20 up there, but I mean, you got a bunch of them right here. Either way, that is the third layer of how to use the bucket system. If you guys actually have an idea of how to utilize this with your stats, let me know in the comments. I would love to understand or think of a different way to utilize the bucket system, because to me it's a thing of beauty. I absolutely love creating lineups based off the bucket system over anything else. Sure, I look at stats like swing stats, which I call the strokes gained stats. I do look at that stuff, but really, like, the bucket system helps me figure out plays better than strokes gained. You know, if I scroll over to the strokes gained section and try to determine, you know, I mean, is Louis good based off of these stats? Of course, a lot of these tee to green stats look good, so we could obviously go by tee to green if we wanted to. But if we, you know, if we sorted them from top to bottom and we wanted to find the best tee to green golfer, I'm guessing a lot of us are going JT over anyone else. And at 8th place for his price tag, it's not going to be good enough to win money. Likewise, maybe Hideki was your next price, you know, your next guy for pricing. He wouldn't have returned, you know, anything. And if Colin Morikawa was the guy, you're like, oh man, this is a second shot golf course all the way. We need second shots. I can tell you right now, none of these guys up here are returning value for you, despite seeing some of the top 20 finishes. It would be interesting to kind of group strokes gained by buckets, but I don't know how to do that. I think that might be a little difficult, but either way, I thoroughly enjoy just the simplicity. I understand me explaining it might not be simple, but I enjoy the simplicity of the bucket system. It helps me out so much. And let me just show you the results of the bucket system. So I'll go through each year. We already did the US Open. So you already saw 2020, 2019, 2018. You see all the last year ones, you know, and if you've been paying attention to the last week column, you see all the last week finishes as well. So that's the US Open. Let me go to the Wyndham Championship, because this would have been the last cut event before the playoffs. That's true. The last cut event before the playoffs. Jim Herman won that tournament. Who would have guessed Jim Herman, right? Well, look at that. He's a last year one. He's a last year one, last week 5. So he's a 1-5. The 5, to me, doesn't feel good. But again, he's a last year one. So when you group them up, and I guess if I were to do that, you're going to see how big this bucket was. It's a very large bucket. 73 golfers. How do we get on Jim Herman? Well, you're not getting on Jim Herman unless you create a lot of lineups and you just accept having him in 1 or 2 lineups, primarily because he's a last year one. I mean, some of these guys I just X'd out. Like, I already knew I wasn't going to play Vince Cavello or Jake Schumann or Ben Taylor, Mark Anderson. I didn't know any of those guys. But if you are making enough lineups, there's a good reason to use these golfers, based off the bucket. You're really not going to get a lot of riff-raff, you know, that are last year 5s or whatever, so on and so forth. But yeah, again, the bucket system still holds true. Now, we had 3 last year 5s that finished 9th place. Patrick Reed was one of them. He was one of the high-priced guys. Would you have played Patrick Reed if he was last year 5? I wouldn't have. I don't know if he really returned value. I mean, he scored pretty high points based off of the rest of them. I mean, he would be the 7th. No, he's not even the 7th. He would be the 8th best golfer, you know, based off of DK points. But yeah, so the last year 5 snuck up there, but most of your finishes right before that were 2s, 1s, 3s, and 4s. Let's go to 2019. I don't have this sorted out, but you see 2s, 1s, and 3s. Got a few 6s, not inside the top 5, but they still showed up. But it's heavily dominated by last year 1s. And that would be the Wyndham Championship. If we go to the Memorial Tournament, I actually have it on 2019 for whatever reason, but here's your 2020. So again, you can see the tournaments up here. I forgot to mention that. And down here, you can see the tab that I'm on. So this is the 2020 DK page. You see nothing but last year 1s. A couple last year 4s. Well, 3 last year 4s. 1 last year 6, last week 4. So 1-6-4. Now that to me is interesting. I played no Matthew Fitzpatrick. I would tell you not to play Matthew Fitzpatrick based off of his bucket combination, because that bucket combination never shows up inside the top 10 or even top 5 until this year. So every once in a while, there will be a mold breaker, but it happens very rarely. Here's one. I want to show you one more that just happened. Martin Laird. Martin Laird just won the Shriners Hospitals Open for Children Open. That was very uncommon. You never really see 5-4s or whatever. But sometimes just based off of whatever the tournament ends up being and whatever craziness might happen at a tournament, sometimes these things happen. So like the Memorial this year was playing extremely difficult. It may not have played the same as it did the year before. So really that last year experience wasn't very helpful. Either way, you just see a bunch of last year 1s still show up. So, and for this tournament, I think last year 1s did not plays. If I were to go to the notes page, yeah, they did not plays, which is amazing, right? You would think maybe a top 20 finish would be better. Not really. And in fact, I think the last year 3s actually jumped forward ahead of the last year 2s, which were guys who missed the cut the year before. A lot of interesting stuff. So yeah, that would be your 2020. 2019, we only see one last year 1, and it ends up being Martin Keimer of all people. You know, that's super interesting. Sure, I have a bunch of people here 14th to 17th place, but I could say that about every single year with different buckets. So really it's irrelevant. But yeah, we got last year 2, last year we have the whole myriad of numbers, but really your top 10 was dominated by last year 4s, which were golfers who missed the cut the year before. So, you know, obviously that added to that number. I'm wondering if I have my years mixed up. 1, 2, 3. So in 2019, I should have 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Somehow I miscounted. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong bucket. But still I miscounted. I'm wondering if what I did, sometimes I'm still kind of cleaning this up a little bit. What'll happen is I won't count underneath a certain number. I still don't understand how I missed that. I'm guessing because he was the last guy. Sure. I have no idea why I missed it, but I missed it. So we're going to add it. You can see now these buckets here get really close. And obviously the Memorial Tournament, which I should have frozen the pane up here. The Memorial Tournament is very, very close with these buckets. You have 3 of them that are identical. So really that's just telling you they're nearly the same. It's a crapshoot. You can obviously look at the min-maxes and how much you want to play of each single one, and that might help you out. Well, hold on. I made a mistake. I know why. Okay, so we didn't miss that. I for whatever reason, they're missed cuts. And the missed cut is right here. I thought this was the last year 4 bucket for whatever reason. This is. Obviously, I could use the color combination and also look at the ranking over here. Okay. So that was the Memorial. I'm sorry that kind of went all over the place. I don't have 2018 color coded by rank by the bucket, so I'm not going to talk about it. We did talk about the Shriners. So this would be, this would be one time where it didn't necessarily work out for us. I mean, a lot of people were off of Will Zalatoris because he had a terrible week the week before, but seeing that he was in that last year bucket 1 could have gotten you back on him. But yeah, 2020, I'm not looking at, again, I'm only looking at top 10 finishes. I'm not looking anything past that. Still see a good chunk of 1s, especially inside the top 5, but then obviously you see a couple other ones. So it's obviously an interesting way to look at it. I guess I don't really need to go through every single tournament that I had. I'm just showing you some other tournaments. This is the American Express, which used to be the Desert Classic, which used to be the Bob Hope Classic, which also used to be all the different Humana, whatever, Bill Clinton Foundation tournament, whatever. But you can see how many last year 1s showed up here at that tournament. 2020, same thing. The one that I always like to come back to is the John Deere Classic. So I think this is really what started it for me. And maybe I've been doing this bucket system for 2 years. Because looking at this, it's the Michael Kim phenomena. Why? Like, how could anyone predict Michael Kim? How? It makes absolutely no sense that Michael Kim won that tournament. He came out of nowhere to win that tournament. Why? Why did Michael Kim win that tournament? I have no other explanation why Michael Kim won other than his last week bucket was 1. And I know that might be a silly way to look at it, but in a way, I could tell you, Michael Kim, I mean, there's no real good plays that were here during that year. Does anyone really remember 2018? The 2018 John Deere Classic? But if I'm looking at last year's 6s, if I go to the notes page, this one's a little bit spread out more than it needs to be. If I come here, and obviously I haven't filled it out, there's no data for 2020 since it was canceled. But if I come here and look at the last year's 6s, this is not going to help my case. Michael Kim was the only one that had finished inside the top 10. Not a lot of data, though, prior to. It actually would have just said to avoid the top 6, or to the last year's 6s. But if you look at both buckets, can't think of the word, that's why I'm stalling here, unbiased, and maybe a last week 1 is worth a play, especially when the last week 1 is a missed cut as opposed to it did not play, because obviously you're going to get a lot of golfers that did not play in most tournaments. I don't know exactly how many that is. 41 out of, I think it's like 39 really, out of 156. But like, okay, so there's a lot of missed cuts. Wow. That means 60 golfers. Same guys that missed the cut last year coming to play this year. So obviously that is your best bucket for last week. And if we actually look at all the last years, because it's conveniently sorted by last year bucket, there's one golfer in each one of those finished inside the top 10, except for the last year 2s, just because there's not a lot. But yeah, last year 1s as well. Either way, to me, The only thing that I could think of why Michael Kim won is because he was a last week bucket 1 golfer. The miscut from the week before was helpful somehow. I mean, that's kind of silly to say because obviously his recent form coming into this tournament wasn't that great either. But it is one of those things that we can actually include. So really, I like coming. I mean, this was kind of the birthplace of the bucket system, was the John Deere Classic, because this is when I actually started thinking about last week finishing positions as some kind of stat to look at. And from there, all I did was keep track of it, throw it into a bucket, just throw it into the ranges. Like I said, I used to do every 15. I tried to figure it out from there, and it just ends up being a nice way to create lineups. Like I said, it narrows your player pool, and also helps you determine better plays between top price guys and lower price guys. So really, that's the only thing I have to add. Is I wanted to go through the results, kind of want to give you a little background and a little bit of everything. Hopefully I didn't lose you, but if I did, again, please leave all your questions in the comments below, because that'll help the entire community out, and it'll also help me explain it to you guys a little bit better. I know a lot of times when I do try to explain, it goes over people's heads. And I don't think about that when I'm explaining it, because in my head it makes sense. It may not in yours, and that is totally fine. Let me help you understand my process, because that way then we all win, right? Okay, that's going to conclude. I do want to thank you guys for watching. Please leave a like. Again, comment with any of your questions, or if you enjoyed the video or didn't enjoy the video, please leave your comments. And of course, subscribe as usual. Thank you very much. Bye.